It is your Classic Metal Show right here on theclassicmetalshow.com. That's brand new stuff from the Sainted Sinners. The name of that tune is Burning the Candle. The name of the album is Back with a Vengeance, and here's a guy that's been back with a vengeance for a couple of years now, a couple of albums. It's the vocalist of the Sainted Sinners. It's David Reece. David, how are you, man?
Hey, how you doing, brother? Nice to hear from you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's been a while, but it hasn't been that long because you are an absolutely productive member of the rock and roll world these days, man. 2 records, 1 year or year and a half or so. That's a lot of production
OCD,
these days. No doubt.
It's my OCD, brother. It's got to be it. I don't know.
I hear you, man. Well, dude, let's talk about that for a second, because in this day and age, to do a record and then do another one, right on top of it, that is very, very quick. What happened that caused such a quick turnaround?
Staying on the course, man. Navigate the ship. I mean, last year, the first album, of course, Frank and I had worked together in Bonfire. He sat down at the table. We around the fire here. We powwowed. We wrote the first album. Went out and started playing it live. He, after our tour, he went out and did the Bonfire tour. Came home and contacted me probably, I don't know, late summerish, and said, I've got about 20 ideas. And I said, start sending them to me. And I don't know what it is about Pane and I. We've got this weird telepathic thing going. It flows, and you just stay with it, and you get what you get. And luckily, I think it's pretty quality stuff. So,
Sure. Is that ever a concern when you write quick? Is that you're using ideas that maybe you wouldn't use if you had like 2 years in between to actually try different things and feel different things?
That's a scary question, bro. And it's a great question, because a lot of writers flip out because they get like what they call block or something.
Sure.
I find if I stay at it and keep working with melodies, I do try to not repeat lyric lines and stuff as much as possible, which in the English language is kind of tough sometimes with rock and roll. But no, if it's boring and it takes me, 3 or 4 tries, I know it's not going to work. And I don't want to edit one piece and put it in another to make the song work. So I usually pass on those ideas. But like I said, I've been pretty lucky working with Frank that we get it and it seems to move, and then we finish it.
No doubt. And dude, it's so interesting talking to different vocalists and hearing their take on things. Last week I talked to Phil Anselmo from Pantera, and Phil told me that some of his ideas that he has in music date back to tapes that he never put out from the 80s, from like 1988. It's like, and I asked him sort of the same question. I said, aren't you afraid of putting out something now that sucked like 30 years ago? And, and he's, it's just interesting because he had almost the exact opposite answer for you than you do, where, he, in his mind, he was thinking, well, it might not be right at this moment, but it is at this moment. And you sort of have almost the exact opposite of, well, if it's right now, then it needs to be out now, and it's just interesting that 2 guys that do kind of the same thing would have such a different dichotomy.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Every singer's got a weird idea how it works. And if I try to analyze it, I scare the crap out of myself. So it's, I really do. I don't know where it comes from, and I don't want to know, because I've been told by guys when they start thinking too hard, you start looking for that thing and it's not inside you, you're not going to find it. You know what I mean?
Right.
A lot of times I'll watch like all this crazy stuff going on around the world. If I have the news on with the sound off and I'm writing and I'm listening to music, I look up and there's an alert, alert to this. So-and-so is going to blow up Guam. And that kind of like was the lyric inspiration for waiting until the countdown begins. I just went, I'm looking at this little guy in North Korea going, it wouldn't be that unrealistic to think that freak could blow up the world because he's mad.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? And it kind of freaked me out because my niece lives in Guam and her husband is serving, and he just returned from, the desert, and he comes home to this nuclear warhead scare.
Right.
She's writing us going, I'm scared, man. And I went, these are weird times. So there's a lot to write about,
There definitely is, man. And what's interesting is not only are you taking modern day situations, and you keep them vague enough to where it still is definitely up to the interpretation, but at the same time,
beautiful. I love that.
But you're doing it with. It's not so hard to read to where it makes no sense. It's not progressive rock either. If you if you find the lyrics, maybe you won't find that. Maybe you won't find the North Korea Guam thing, but you might find you can look at the news and see, okay, well, this can definitely relate to that. It's really kind of a cool thing what you're doing, man.
Yeah. It wasn't it. What was that crazy show with that guy that was that daytime show that had all those people with all these fist fighting?
Oh, Jerry Springer.
It's like almost like now it's like the news is almost like a full contact sport where I can flip through channels and watch this total dichotomy of. It's just insanity, what they're doing. There's this side against that side, and this guy thinks he's bad, this guy thinks he's great, and you just kind of watch it and go, it's like reality TV. It's weird. So I don't know. It gives me inspiration, and being married that and having failed relationships, that's another one that everybody can relate to.
Sure.
How you pull out of it. I mean, you could say, "Oh God, poor me, I can't find a good woman," or whatever, a partner, and cry about it. But if you can maybe say something in the lyric where, this is how I pulled out of it. This is what I got to do.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, man. Now let's talk about the style of the record and the first one as well. But this one a lot more than the debut. Definitely continues the late 70s rock vibe to it. It's very clear that Frank worships at the altar of Blackmore or Schenker or Rhodes or one of those guys. Is it?
Yeah.
But the one thing that really stood out to me listening to the record is you kind of stepped back, I guess, from the keyboard ambiance with this one. It's much more of a rock record than the first one. Why is that?
A couple of reasons. Freddie Dornberg, love him to death. The guy is, with Axel Rudy Pell and all those things he's doing, I mean, he's in like 8 different bands.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't work out, the schedule. And Frank came to me and said, okay, let's just do a 3-piece rock guitar album. I said, Frank, we can't go from one extreme to the other. This is our sophomore. We've got to keep those elements.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's more guitar-based, but I fought hard to get keyboards in. So I got Eric Rangno to come in and contribute. A guy named Angel from Greece jumped in, and just to kind of give it those subtleties.
Sure.
But yeah, it's more of a shine time for Frank. He's on the altar for sure. He's pulling out all the tricks that he's picked up as a kid, and put his own touch to it. So I mean, the thing about Frank that's cool is I think we discussed this last time. Living in Germany like I did for years, most German guitar players that I've worked for, they worship Blackmore or
right.
Tony Iommi or Wolf Hoffman, yeah. Mm-hmm. But when I met Frank and I went to his house the first time, there's a Stevie Ray Vaughan poster on his wall, Randy Rhoads, Roy Gallagher, and I'm going, you listen to these guys? And he's like, yeah, man, these are the real deal. And I went, wow, that's cool. Because
right.
in Bonfire, he's playing what was already recorded by other guys, so I never really got to hear what he did.
Right.
So, and that's where I come from. I mean, I'm in my late 50s, and it's like I can't try to, write pop songs, because of just the maturity thing. Maybe I'm not mature, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Right, sure.
It does. That's where I come from. The 70s and 80s. That was the mind-altering time of music for me,
Sure. Definitely, man. Now, I have to imagine, since you've been in, several bands at this point, and probably several more that I don't even know about, before you were in Accept, and before obviously you had a life before Accept,
Yeah.
I have to imagine with each different band, and I'm not a musician, so I'll just put that on the table first, so that you can tell me I'm crazy.
No, contraire, mon frère. You are a musician because there's two kinds, players and listeners.
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, as a listener musician, I'll say I have not been creative in a band. I'll put it that way, and okay. I have to imagine that the creative process with each different group of guys, as well as each different way that you record, is very different. How is the process for Sainted Sinners different from from Bangladore Choir or from Accept or from, Bonfire or whatnot? Because I have to imagine with each thing, you almost have to adjust what you do to the other 2, 3, 4 guys that are in the room with you.
Okay, that's a great question. With Accept, I was green as git, right? I thought I had all the chops because I'd played in cover bands for 3 or 4 years and all over this earth, playing top 40 songs, the metal things that was happening.
Sure.
And when I walked into that gig, I thought, hey, I can sing like Dio. I can sing like Halford. Well, guess what? We don't need Dio in here. We need David Reece.
Right.
So that process was beating my brains out because, I would sing ahead of the groove and everything in Accept is very mechanic.
Right.
Very German, on the snare, up on the top, it's da, 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 da.
Right.
And I would come from the Paul Rogers feel, laid back backbeats. So that was a conflict, and I had to I played their songs live, but in an American way. So that taught me a heavy lesson about taking care of your voice, getting some sleep, practice. I had to sleep with a metronome under my pillow because my timing was so crap. So that's true, and it just drilled it in my brain because I was singing ahead of the grooves. So what happened, I think, later. Bangalore Choir was my baby, so I rounded up those guys and roped them in and said, this is where I'm going, and they were great musicians, and we just started writing song. And I think because I'd been at Accept, they gave me that freedom.
Sure.
That's Reece, he's already done it, let him sing.
Okay.
But, Kurt Mitchell was, very instrumental and talking to me about melodies and harmonies, which I was pretty lame at the time still, and I still am.
Right.
But with Bonfire, I stepped in the shoes of Klaus Lessman, and the hard thing about that, kind of like with Accept, is you get a guy who's kind of like people grew up with him.
Right.
So you put a new sound on it, people are going to hate your guts or they're going to love it. And
Right.
It's about 50-50. So with Hans Ziller, it was basically, wow, I got David Reece. I'm not bragging here. Dave knows what he's doing. Let's write an album. And Hans did everything completely backwards. I mean, you typically have a straight beat, not 92.6 BPM.
Right.
Hans would send me stuff that was like 93.7, and they're like, what is that? And just little verses, like 15-second pieces, and say, right, verses here. Okay, what comes after that? I don't know. Think of something. So I wrote that album, Glorious, with him at Ali Del Vecchio's studio, basically just winging it. And that was one of their biggest selling albums in 10 years. I mean, it was lucky. We got lucky.
Sure.
With Sainted Sinners, kind of the same thing with Frank. I mean, I give him the rope, and he gives me mine. And if we jump off and hang ourselves, we kind of know when we're working on the song if it's going nowhere. But luckily, that hasn't happened yet. I mean, it's happened on a few ideas. We scrapped it. But I think you kind of earn a little bit of cred, I guess, where people go, they like your style of singing, and they want that stamp on the song. So I'm lucky,
No doubt, man. What's more satisfying? Is it more satisfying to form something and then go out and slug your way into, literally earning each and every fan? Or is it satisfying to jump into a big band that already has an established audience and, make or break based on, how you carry their music as well as adding to it?
It's all about balls, dude. Ronnie Dio said it perfectly. It's when he got into Sabbath. I mean, I loved it. Ronnie said, open the lion's mouth, stick your head in, and if he bites down, there goes your head. I mean, he was up against the same thing with Ozzy.
Sure.
And Ozzy had incredible success right away. And everybody were like, hey, Dio, you're not the guy. But, I mean, he pulled it off in a big way. Now, joining a band like Accept, actually, I just went to see Accept last night. I'm nursing a volume and beer hangover at the moment, going out to see the guys in Milan. And one thing that it's just ingrained in my head, they've got Mark Ternillo singing for him, and he's pulling it off well. Those guys are a machine.
Sure.
And they have that nostalgic history to where everybody knows every word. But last night they focused on the newer material, and it still worked. I mean, I was like, wow, they're playing a lot of the new album, And, of course, at the end they did Princess and Balls. But the crowd was up in arms, and the horns were flying.
Right.
So I hope I answered your question. I mean, you just go out there and you're responsible for not only the 4 other or 5 other guys to get a paycheck. You're responsible to carry the flag. You got a crew of guys depending on you. So if you're out until 6, 7 o'clock in the morning shouting your head off and playing cards, you're not going to be ready. So I'm pretty boring on tour, I learned the hard way.
Right.
I get done with the gig, I meet the fans, and I appreciate that because without that, we're not crap. So I go to my room and I sit there with my head buzzing from volume, and everybody else, I can hear them in the lobby, and but I force myself to breathe deep, go to bed. You got to drive 8 hours tomorrow, and you got to sing for 3 hours. So, it's just how you. I guess it's like what you do. You have an audience. You're an entertainer.
Sure.
So you have to kind of put all that in a jar, and it's really hard to do. I think for me sometimes, put the lid on it and hold it tight.
Yeah. No, it definitely. You're singing to the choir here, man, because Lord knows, our show airs on Saturdays from 9 to 3 in the morning. So, it takes unbelievable discipline as a guy that likes to party to say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that on Saturdays. I fully get it.
But after I turn off that big red knob, I'm heading to the bar. I'm going to that refrigerator. I know exactly what it is.
Exactly, man.
I know damn well what that means.
No,
and that's what I do. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've got a job to do, but when I've got 3 or 4 days off, you can find me at the local hoorah. I might have a day off after that where I can holler and make all the noise I want, but I know that day after that, I better shut up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you, man. Well, talk a little bit about the meeting back up with the guys from Accept. I have to imagine that that going into that there was excitement, obviously, but also trepidation because it didn't work out necessarily with those guys. But it's nice that they extended the invite. That's doesn't happen often.
Marcus Vosgian, who's with Nuclear Blast, is also doing promotion with us on Saint and Sinners, and wrote me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, would you like to see Accept? And I'm like, I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what's going to happen. Of course, you said that weird feeling, like what's going to happen. And the more I got to thinking about it, and I hope we can get into this before the end of the program about me doing the Eat the Heat tour. I'm doing a special thing right now.
Sure.
I said, you know what? I'm going. And to be honest, I was scared crap shitless to go shake the hands of the guys. So I didn't do it. But I went right up front, threw my horns in the air with my wife. Peter Baltus leaned over and gave me a big smile and threw a pick at me and winked his eyes. And I just looked at him. I said, hey, man, that was 30 years ago. This is the reason I'm talking to you today, Chris.
Sure.
Is because of that opportunity. And being in the audience, I didn't know if I was going to get bottles thrown at me or or people were going to welcome me, but it was overwhelming. The people would turn around and go, oh, that's Reece. He did the Accept album, Eat the Heat. And they would turn around and hug me or take a picture. So it was cool. I was asked today by Marcus, did you go back and hang out with the guys? And I said, regretfully, no. I didn't want to push my luck, so to speak.
Sure.
And make them. I respected my space. I respected the opportunity, and I thank them again right now for reaching out the olive branch and saying, come on in.
No doubt. Now, do you think in the future, maybe you'll push that to the next phase, and see what happens there?
I would love nothing more than to sit down and talk to Wolf and Peter and just, not go over what happened and, I apologize. And just say, hey, man, respect. Thank you for what happened. I'm sorry it ended the way it did. You guys are killing it. Respect. Because like you said earlier about going out and building a fan base and stuff, that's rewarding.
Sure.
But it's hard, too.
Sure.
There was a band called Night Demon last night opening for them.
Yeah, I'm very
Those
familiar.
guys killed it. They had, after like 4 songs, the crowd was jumping up and down, and I'm like, that's a young, hungry band.
Right.
And they had to work for it. And no encore, a little bit of clap, 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 clap. But, during the set, people were cheering, but after they were done, it was like, bring on the beast. Let's see Accept.
Right, exactly.
It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing.
No, it definitely is. Now, real quick, just one question, then I will ask you about that Eat the Heat tour that you're doing. I personally, and this is just a overview of the world these days of music, I am a believer that the internet does you guys, and by you guys I mean bands that are not established. Now, you obviously are established, but Sainted Sinners is not. So if you say David Reece is doing a project, that has a lot more chance of being heard than Sainted Sinners is back. And I'm sure you get that. But
I agree.
I'm a believer that the internet does not help people at all find new music as much as people say, oh, it's great and you can share with everybody and blah, blah, blah. I personally don't believe that it does as much as like the old tape trading days, just because there's no commitment from the bands. You know, there's no. I mean, I'm 49, so I'm in that age range, and I remember if I got a tape and I heard a song that I liked, man, I was copying that off and giving it to every friend that I had, and we all, bonded over bands that everybody else didn't know.
That was real networking.
Yeah, that's gone now.
I mean, exactly. What about those days when you were bored with your buddies and you went in and started smelling vinyl and going through, records and spent God knows how many hours looking at cool album covers and then pulling it out when you got home and cranking it with your headphones and just staring at the artwork? That whole scene is gone. And I agree. This networking thing is a joke because I think, as opposed to what you and I used to do, what they do, it's all about me. Mm-hmm. They don't take it to share it. They put it on their little iPod, and how many people can listen to 10,000 songs? There's not enough days or years.
Right.
So it's like a music hoarding mentality. Mm-hmm. And, it hurts the bands, but I think they overhype that, hurting financially, because we're in a market where you have to evolve. And live, that's evolving. I mean, what bands are making money?
Right.
The bands that had an 80s past with hit singles. Mm-hmm. Young bands are playing for the door. I'm playing for the door sometimes. I don't really know where I'm going with this. I hope I make sense. But
no, it does.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There is no personal intimacy on the internet. There is all this. I can have the biggest balls on the universe in an argument with somebody behind this iPad than I do face to face with an agreement or a disagreement or a creative process. Because, when you're file sharing with music, that's another thing when you're writing.
Yeah.
Sterile, man.
Sure.
I mean, I've got this Eat the Heat thing to talk about, Saint and Sinners, and I'm also making a solo album. So I hope we can touch on that.
No, we can.
Because on this solo album, I'm emphatic about real drums and real bass. I want my rhythm section together.
Sure.
And that's what I'm doing. Because it's real. You can make all the great file records you want, but that human element of rhythm is gone.
Right. Yeah. And at the same time, as fans, the commitment to the band. I mean, I can remember discovering, I have half a dozen bands in my collection, probably more than that they didn't go anywhere, but they're favorites of mine of all time. And I literally bought the records because the cover looked cool. Not even because I'd ever heard a song. A band just off the top of my head that comes to mind is, remember that band Little Angels out of England?
Absolutely.
Didn't have a huge following per se, but they had a really cool cover, and Don't Pray For Me was like a cool title. And I was like, okay, bought. Here's my $8. Let's see if this is any good. That's gone these days, man. It's just sad.
And you know what else about that English thing? To me, as a kid, or even after that, English bands were just cool.
Oh yeah.
I mean, those guys, they started a movement. You know what I'm saying? So any kind of British rock, even the Who, their album covers were kind of suggestive. The Stones, come on. I was just thinking about Sticky Fingers the other day, the album cover.
Right.
I mean, if you put that out now, you'd be hanging. Somebody would be offended, and it would probably sell 10 million copies just because of the hype, but just the amount of drama involved. I mean, those days was cool. You got a zipper. You can unzip the cover. You got Roxy Music. You had, two naked girls on the cover. What 14-year-old kid's not going to buy that album? He doesn't know who Roxy Music is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
He's not buying it because of the music.
Exactly. No doubt, man. Well, David, let's talk about the Eat the Heat thing that you're doing, because it's very cool, and it's a much unheralded, because of the short time that you're in Accept. It's the overlooked record, and everybody that I know that is an Accept fan loves that album, and it's really never gotten its due. So talk a little bit about what you're doing. Okay, that's what I'm doing. That album, I started noticing on the Bonfire tour. I think they re-released it on vinyl and remastered it. Mm-hmm. The fans would be at the merch booth, right, with that album. Okay. LP,
and would you sign this for me? And they'd always say, especially the Germans, I hated you when this happened. I hated the band. My life was over. Udo was the guy. But the last 10 years or so, I find that I love this album. It was like a late bloomer. And I was getting lots of pressure from the guy named Giles Lavery, who manages Graham Bonnet. He always says to me, put some of those songs in your set. Okay, I put Generation Class, blah, blah, blah. He goes, Dave, you got 1 million views on that video. Okay, you should really work that part of your life. So while he's up my rear end about it, literally like within a day or two, I get an email from a promoter in Barcelona, a guy named Tony, for the Matterrock Festival, and asked me, would you be interested in doing that album in its entirety live? And I went, wow. Yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm celebrating that album because that's what gave me the right to talk to you and open all these doors. But it never got played. And the band don't want to talk about it, except they literally don't mention it.
Right.
But there's fans that really like it now. And I have the great open freedom to go to Spain and use an incredible backing band of Spanish musicians, right? Then I have shows in Sweden, and I'm going to bring Andy Susamil from UDO, the bassist from Saint and Sinners, and a new kid named Philip Meese. The drummer and Malta are actually in my solo band.
Okay.
And I have an Italian group of guys who are going to do the Swiss shows with me because it's fairly close to where we live. But they're all guys who grew up with Accept and actually love that album too. And they can play me the songs or just sing me the lyrics. And I'm like, okay, this is a great idea. So as soon as I open the floodgate, I got a guy named Tony Sambora who does a lot of my posters and designs and all this. We're going to release a big video tonight with actually me singing live that stuff with Accept, a big promo shout out.
Cool.
And he's doing an amazing job with it. So I tip my hat to Giles and to Tony and to the fans who I'm going to give this record its due. And I can sing that stuff still.
Okay.
So if I was a little scared of it, to be honest. And I just did some gigs with Ian Pace, and I had to do the B-sides of Deep Purple.
Okay.
That stuff's scary, man.
Right.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Ian Gillan, he's a god. So he can't do it anymore. And I'm like, okay. So I'm in my living room screaming at the top of my lungs, Child in Time. And I'm going, wow, I can do it. It's still there. So that all kind of came together with this Eat the Heat thing, and because all that's in the middle of outer space, that range. I mean, I'm not going to do all of it, but I just feel it's time. And Frank's going on tour with Bonfire. After we finish these gigs in January and February promoting Back with a Vengeance, Frank's out the door on the road with Bonfire. Right. And they got a heavy schedule. So I'm not going to sit on my rear end and wait for him to come home. I'm going to pursue my destiny and sing. I want to perform.
Excellent, man. Well, dude, sounds like you got a lot going on. The project of the minute, though, is Sainted Sinners. The name of the album is Back with a Vengeance. And David, as a tradition on the show, you've done this before. Why don't you pick a song from the new record? Tell us a quick story about it to wrap this one up.
Okay, let's think. Back with a Vengeance. Let's go with the title. That's it. When you do sophomore releases, people typically think it's just a project. In a sense, it is because Bonfire and my other things, my entities I'm involved with. But this is kind of the lyric as a proof that you can kick me down and I'm going to stand up, and so is the band. The next one I'd like to mention, because I'm doing a lot of radio today.
Sure.
I'm going to give you "Let It Go" because that's a real groove kind of thing.
All right.
I like that one a lot. And I would also like to mention David Reece signed a multiple album solo deal with Target Mighty Music Records, and I'm having a solo album come out in November. Oh. I have written a heavy melodic. So if you like the Eat the Heat thing, this has got that modern, heavy guitar, melodic rock. It's not a White Snake tribute album, because what's the sense of making another Saint and Sinners album with David solo?
Right.
So I've reached out to some young cats. They grew up on what I did, and it's, I can tell you, it's simply amazing. I'm really excited.
And you'll obviously be back to talk about that one in like October.
Your name is right here on the list, and believe me, I save everything.
Nice. Well, let's check out some Saint and Sinners right now. This is the title track. It's Back with a Vengeance right here on your Classic Metal Show.